Ave Imperator. I need you to understand something about Nurgle's corruption that the Inquisition never tells you. When the plague god touches you, you don't die. Death would be mercy. Instead, your body continues living, functioning, even thriving, while transforming into something that violates every law of biology. Your organs rearrange themselves into impossible configurations. Your flesh becomes host to entire ecosystems of demon life. Your bones soften, melt, and regrow in geometries that should not exist. And the worst part, you remain conscious through every single moment, aware, experiencing every sensation as your body betrays the very concept of humanity itself. I know this because I documented it happening to myself, day by day, hour by hour, heartbeat by heartbeat. This is what really happens when Nurgle corrupts you, and I recorded everything. Ave Imperator. I am Biologus Documentus Hadrian Vex, formerly of the Adeptus Mechanicus Research Station Omega-7, assigned to study xenos and chaos biology from what I believed was a safe distance. For 23 years, I analyzed tissue samples, examined preserved specimens, and documented the effects of warp taint on organic matter through laboratory observation and clinical detachment. I never expected to become the primary subject of my own research. I never imagined that the carefully maintained barrier between observer and specimen would collapse so completely, so catastrophically. But 3 months ago, during what should have been a routine examination of recovered materials from the plague wars in the Ultramar sector, something went catastrophically wrong. A containment seal failed, not through negligence but through age. The seal was 900 years old, maintained through ritual and prayer more than actual engineering, and on that day the prayers were insufficient. A single drop of corrupted fluid, designated in my logs as Death Guard Ichor Prime, sample 7 Alpha Tertius, escaped containment. So small I barely noticed it, a droplet smaller than a grain of rice. It made contact with the exposed skin on my left wrist, right where my augmetic interface meets organic flesh. That moment, 14:37 Imperial Standard Time, day 0 of my corruption, changed everything. That microscopic contact began a process I cannot stop, cannot reverse, cannot escape, and am compelled to document with the precision my training demands, even as that precision becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. What follows is my complete personal log of corruption, my transformation from human to something else, something more, something terrible, recorded not for salvation. I abandoned hope of that weeks ago, but so that others might understand what Nurgle truly does to those he claims. So that when the Inquisition speaks of chaos corruption in abstract terms of spiritual taint and warp mutation, there exists a concrete, detailed account of what actually happens to flesh, bone, mind, and soul. This is not propaganda designed to glorify chaos. This is not heretical scripture meant to convert the faithful. This is scientific documentation of biological and psychological transformation, recorded with as much objectivity as I can maintain while being simultaneously observer and observed, researcher and research subject, documentarian and specimen. This is the truth, unfiltered, unedited, complete. Day 0, the touch hour by hour. Hour 0, 14:37 Imperial Standard Time. Containment breach in sample chamber 7 Alpha. The alarm klaxons were immediate and deafening. Red emergency lumens bathed the laboratory in the color of warning. I initiated lockdown protocols immediately, sealed the chamber, activated atmospheric purge, triggered decontamination sequences. But I was already too late. The fluid designated Death Guard Ichor Prime had made contact with my left wrist. The exposure point was small, approximately 2.3 millimeters in diameter. I could see it clearly, a tiny discoloration on my skin where the droplet had landed. I enacted immediate personal decontamination. 17 minutes of scrubbing with counterseptic agents so harsh they stripped away the outer layer of my epidermis. The flesh showed minor chemical burns from the decontamination process, but no obvious signs of corruption. The discoloration appeared to have been removed. Initial assessment, recorded in my log with what I now recognize as catastrophic optimism. Contamination minimal. Decontamination appears successful. Standard medical observation recommended for 72 hours as precautionary measure. I was so wrong, so catastrophically terminally wrong. Hour 1, 15:37. First indication that decontamination had failed. Mild burning sensation at the contact point. I examined the area under magnification. The discoloration had returned, not on the surface, but beneath it. The corruption had penetrated into the dermal layer during that initial contact, deeper than counterseptic could reach. The affected area measured exactly 2.3 in diameter, perfectly circular. The flesh had taken on a faint greenish tinge that matched the color profile of Nurgle-associated corruption I had documented in hundreds of previous specimens. Applied additional counterseptic directly to the affected site. Discoloration did not fade. If anything, it appeared to darken slightly as I watched. First flutter of genuine concern registered in my consciousness. I had seen this pattern before, in tissue samples from plague-touched corpses, in biopsy specimens from infected populations. The green discoloration was a signature marker of Nurgle's touch. But those had been dead tissue, samples, subjects. This was my own living flesh, and the corruption was active. Hour 3, 17:37. Burning sensation intensified from mild discomfort to constant ache. Re-examination revealed disturbing progression. The discolored area had expanded to 7 diameter. Growth rate, 2.35 per hour. At this rate, my entire wrist would be affected within 12 hours. More concerning, the skin texture was changing. The affected area felt different under my fingers, slightly rough, almost scale-like at the edges. Temperature differential, 2.3 degrees Celsius above baseline body temperature. The corruption was metabolically active, generating heat as it spread. I administered broad-spectrum anti-warp taint medication, the standard Mechanicus protocol for early-stage chaos exposure. Dosage, maximum recommended for baseline human physiology. Effect, none observable. The discoloration continued spreading at the same rate. I began documenting everything with obsessive detail. Part clinical necessity, part desperate hope that if I treated this as research rather than personal crisis, I could maintain some semblance of control. Hour 6, 20:37. Burning evolved into throbbing pulse that synchronized perfectly with my heartbeat. The corruption had integrated with my circulatory system. I could feel it spreading with each pulse, not imagination, but genuine sensation of foreign presence moving through my bloodstream. Affected area expansion, 15 diameter. The discoloration had deepened from faint green to distinct emerald hue. Small raised bumps were forming in perfect ring pattern around the original contact point. I examined these bumps under microscopic magnification. What I observed made my augmetic heart skip several programmed beats. Inside each bump, I could see movement. Microscopic organisms, possibly Nurgle spawn at cellular level, were clearly visible beneath the translucent skin layer. They writhed and pulsed with independent life, existing in states between living and dead that violated every principle of biology I had spent my life studying. This was the moment of true recognition, of understanding. I was not merely infected with a disease. I was becoming host to demonic life at the microscopic scale. These organisms were not parasites in any conventional sense. They were integrating with my cellular structure, becoming part of me even as they remained fundamentally other. First moment of genuine terror. Not the abstract fear of scholarly study, but visceral, personal dread of what was happening to my own flesh. Hour 12:02:37 Day 1. Sleep was impossible. The throbbing had become constant, demanding. The affected area had expanded to 40 tomb diameter, nearly covering my entire wrist. Temperature differential, 3.1 degrees above baseline. The bumps had developed into small boils, 7 of them, arranged in perfect circle around the original contact point like planets orbiting a diseased star, each approximately 4 in diameter, filled with cloudy fluid that pressed against the surface of my skin. Against every protocol of scientific observation, against my better judgment, I pressed on one of the boils to examine its contents. It burst with disturbing ease, releasing substance that was neither pus nor blood nor any bodily fluid I recognized. Greenish, viscous, with consistency like spoiled honey. And the smell sweet, cloying, like flowers blooming in a mass grave. The fluid contained visible organisms. I collected a sample for microscopic analysis. What I saw defied categorization. Microdemons, each smaller than a grain of rice but possessing distinct form and apparent consciousness. They moved with purpose, not the random drift of bacteria or the mechanical response of white blood cells. They moved like tiny creatures exploring new territory. And they were laughing. I could hear them, high-pitched giggles that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and manifest directly in my auditory cortex. The sound made my brain itch in ways I cannot adequately describe. Most disturbing, when I tried to dispose of the fluid sample, the organisms resisted. They did not want to leave my body. They clung to my skin, attempting to burrow back in through pores and hair follicles. I had to incinerate the sample with a plasma torch to truly destroy them. The realization hit with sickening force. These organisms were not merely infecting me. They were claiming me, making my body their home, and they would fight to remain. Hour 18:08:37 Day 1. The corruption had advanced to my mid-forearm. Discoloration covered approximately 40% of my left arm from wrist to elbow. The skin throughout the affected region had transformed to something resembling diseased leather, thick, slightly porous, greenish-brown in color like rotted wood. The boils had multiplied, 43 of them now, arranged in concentric circles spreading up my arm. Some had burst spontaneously, weeping the strange, sweet-smelling fluid continuously. Others remained intact, pulsing visibly with the movement of the organisms within. But the most disturbing development, I had begun to feel the organisms as a presence, not pain, presence, movement, life that was separate from me yet somehow part of me simultaneously. They were establishing themselves, multiplying, creating complex colonies within my flesh. And I could hear them, not just the giggles but whispers, tiny voices speaking in a language I should not understand but somehow did. They were pleased, happy. They had found a good home, they said. They would help me grow, they promised. They would make me beautiful in the eyes of grandfather. Grandfather, they meant Nurgle, the plague god himself. And these microscopic demons were his children, his gifts, his blessings spreading through my corruption-touched flesh. I tried to pray to the Emperor, tried to recite the catechisms of protection I had memorized in my youth, but the words felt hollow, meaningless. And beneath them, growing stronger with each passing hour, I heard something else, something vast and patient, settling its attention upon me like a heavy blanket. Hour 24:14:37 Day 1. First full day of corruption complete, 24 hours since the initial contact. The transformation was undeniable now, visible, horrifying. The affected area covered my entire left arm from fingertips to shoulder. Every square centimeter of skin throughout this region had transformed. The greenish-brown discoloration was uniform now, the texture consistently leather-like. The boils numbered in the hundreds, covering my arm in layers like scales on a reptile. Temperature throughout the affected limb, 4.7 degrees above baseline. Metabolic activity was intense. My body was burning calories at an accelerated rate, trying to fuel whatever process was happening to my flesh. But something strange had occurred. The pain had begun to change, not intensifying into agony as I had expected, but transforming into something else. Something I struggle to describe even now. It still hurt, yes, but the pain had developed texture, complexity. It had become interesting, almost pleasurable in its intensity, like the burn of muscles after intense exercise or the sting of alcohol on a wound. Unpleasant, but also satisfying in a way that made me uneasy to contemplate. I documented this psychological change with growing concern. The corruption was not just physical. My perception was being affected. My ability to properly categorize sensations was becoming compromised. And beneath it all, growing stronger with each passing hour, I felt that presence. That vast, patient attention focused upon me, watching, waiting, approving of what I was becoming. Day 3, the voice speaks. On the morning of day 3, everything changed. The corruption had spread beyond my left arm. Fingers of discoloration were creeping across my chest, advancing up my neck, beginning the invasion of my torso. The transformation was no longer localized. It was becoming systemic. But the physical changes, as horrifying as they were, paled compared to what happened to my mind that morning. I was documenting the spread pattern, measuring, recording, maintaining my scientific discipline as my last anchor to sanity, when I felt a presence settle over my consciousness like warm water. Not hostile, not intrusive, simply present. And then he spoke. "Little one," the voice said, and it was kind, so terribly, genuinely kind, like a grandfather greeting a beloved child. "Why do you fight? Why do you perceive growth as affliction?" The voice did not come from outside. It manifested from within my own thoughts, yet I knew with absolute certainty it was not my own voice. The presence was too vast, too old, too fundamentally other to be anything originating from my own consciousness. I tried to ignore it, focused harder on my measurements, my observations, my desperate clinging to scientific method. The boils on my left arm had developed a new characteristic. They were beginning to breathe. Tiny respiratory cycles synchronized with my own lungs, as if my arm had developed independent pulmonary function. "You document," the voice continued, patient as geological time. "You observe, you seek understanding. This is good, little one. Knowledge is growth and growth is sacred, but you observe from fear. You call it corruption when it is evolution. You call it disease when it is life embracing its fullest, most honest expression." I spoke aloud, foolish, but isolation and mounting terror had eroded my self-control. My voice came out hoarse, strained. "You are Nurgle, the plague god, chaos made manifest, enemy of all ordered existence." The presence radiated what felt like amusement. Not mockery, genuine, warm amusement at a child's adorable misconception. Grandfather's laughter, echoing from somewhere beyond the boundaries of reality. "I am Nurgle, yes. Chaos, perhaps, to those who fear the natural cycles. But I am also truth, little one. I am the reality your Imperium denies with every prayer, every purification, every desperate attempt to freeze existence in amber and prevent its natural transformation. I am the cycle that governs all things: birth, growth, decay, death, rebirth. These are not separate stages but one continuous flow. Your scientists understand this intellectually, but your culture rejects it emotionally. You fear the ending of things. You fight against natural transformation. You call stagnation preservation and change corruption. But I do not corrupt, little one. I complete. I fulfill the promise written into every cell of your body from the moment of your birth, the promise that you will change, will grow, will eventually return to the garden from which all life springs. I am not your enemy. I am your completion." I wanted to argue, to cite imperial truth, biological principles, the absolute heresy of every word this presence spoke. But part of me, a part that was growing larger with each hour of corruption, understood what he meant. My augmetic components, the metal and plasteel integrated with my flesh through mechanicus ritual, were rigid, unchanging, static. They would function exactly as designed until catastrophic failure, at which point they would simply stop. No transformation, no adaptation, no growth. But my organic components, they changed constantly. Cells died and were replaced, tissues adapted to stress, bones remodeled under pressure. My body was always transforming, always in flux, never truly static even for a moment. The corruption was simply acceleration of this natural process, transformation made visible, change embraced rather than denied. No, I forced the word out, though it felt increasingly hollow. Natural transformation serves survival, adaptation, function. This serves only destruction, only chaos. Does it? The presence felt closer now, wrapping around my thoughts like morning fog seeping into every crevice. Look at your arm, little one. Truly look. Not with the eyes of fear, but with the eyes of understanding that made you a scholar of life's mysteries. Your arm is more alive now than it has ever been. It teems with organisms, each playing their sacred role in the great cycle. You host entire civilizations within your flesh, bacteria, fungi, microdemons all working in harmony. You are not dying, little one. You are becoming a universe unto yourself, a mobile ecosystem, a walking garden of infinite complexity. Is that not wondrous? Is that not beautiful in a way your stagnant mechanicus could never achieve with all their rigid metal and dead circuitry? I looked, and Emperor forgive me, I saw what he meant. My arm was no longer merely a limb. It was an environment, a habitat. The boils were not sores but dwellings, each hosting colonies of microscopic life. The discolored flesh was not diseased but transformed into substrate capable of supporting this new ecosystem. The sweet smell was not decay but the perfume of abundant, thriving life in all its chaotic glory. It was horrifying, grotesque, a violation of everything I understood about proper biological organization. And it was, in a terrible way that made me hate myself for acknowledging beautiful, complex, more interesting than baseline human tissue could ever be, more alive. That is the gift I offer, the voice said, satisfaction evident in its warm tones. Not death, but transcendence of your limited understanding of what life can be. Not corruption, but completion of your potential. Not destruction, but transformation into something greater than what you were. When you stop fighting, little one, when you accept that decay is sacred and endings are merely transitions to new beginnings, then you will know peace. Such perfect, absolute peace. The peace of flowing with the cycle instead of exhausting yourself in futile resistance. I do not demand this. I do not force. I simply offer and wait. With infinite patience, I wait for my children to understand that their suffering comes not from me, but from their resistance to me. The presence faded gradually like warmth dissipating from stone after sunset, but it did not leave entirely. I could still feel it at the edges of my awareness, watching, waiting, ready to speak again whenever I was ready to truly listen. I was left alone with my observations, my documentation, and my growing horror at how reasonable the plague god's words had sounded. Day 5. The ecosystem estabilis. By day 5, the corruption had claimed my entire left arm, my left shoulder, and significant portions of my torso. But the spread had slowed somewhat, not because the corruption was failing, but because it had entered a new phase. Instead of continuing rapid territorial expansion, it was now focusing on deepening its hold on already corrupted areas, developing complexity, building infrastructure, transforming simple infection into sophisticated ecosystem. My left hand had undergone the most dramatic visible change. The fingers had lengthened, bones stretching and joints multiplying until each digit possessed 7 articulation points instead of 3. The skin had become semi-transparent in places, revealing the internal structure, muscles that moved in ways human anatomy should not permit, blood vessels that pulsed with greenish fluid, and networks of something that looked like nerve tissue but branched in fractal patterns, creating webs of sensation too complex for baseline human neurology. I tested the functionality of this transformed appendage with scientific curiosity that should have horrified me, but instead felt entirely natural. When I flexed my fingers, they moved with disturbing fluidity. No longer constrained by normal joint limitations, they could bend in any direction, curl into impossible configurations, perform manipulations that would have been beyond my original hand's capabilities. Dexterity tests revealed shocking results. My corrupted hand could perform micromanipulations far exceeding my right hand's capacity. I could thread a needle with fingers that should have been too clumsy, could grip objects with force my baseline human musculature should not generate, could feel textures and temperature variations below the threshold of normal human tactile perception. I documented this with clinical precision. Enhanced dexterity observed in corrupted extremity, possible applications in precision work, strength increased by estimated 340% compared to baseline, sensory perception appears enhanced, can detect temperature variations of 0.1 degrees Celsius, pressure differences below normal human threshold of detection. Reading those words now, I recognize the disturbing shift in my analytical framework. I was noting enhancements rather than deformities. I was documenting useful capabilities rather than grotesque mutations. The corruption was affecting not just my body but my interpretation of what was happening to my body. The upper arm showed different adaptations. The bicep and tricep muscles had developed additional layers, creating a striated appearance like geological strata exposed in a cliff face. 7 distinct muscle groups where baseline humans possess 2, each operating independently yet in coordination. When I flexed, I could see each layer activate in sequence, a ripple of movement cascading through my transformed musculature. The effect was hypnotic, beautiful in a way that made me profoundly uncomfortable to acknowledge. The shoulder revealed the most sophisticated adaptation. The bone structure had begun rearranging itself, developing additional joints and articulation points that allowed my arm to rotate and move in ways impossible for standard human anatomy. I could twist my arm completely around, 360 degrees and beyond, without pain or mechanical resistance. I demonstrated this rotation while recording with my remaining augmetic equipment, watching my corrupted limb spin like a mechanical component, independent of the constraints that governed my baseline anatomy. And I felt pride, actual pride in the efficiency, the elegance of these modifications. That emotional response terrified me far more than the physical changes themselves, because it meant the psychological corruption had advanced beyond my conscious awareness. I was no longer simply observing transformation. I was appreciating it, valuing it, beginning to see it not as loss of humanity but as transcendence of human limitations. Day 7, the first growth. On the morning of Day 7, I woke to discover something fundamentally new. My body had begun generating entirely novel structures, not just modifying existing anatomy, but creating additions that had no baseline human equivalent. Emerging from my left shoulder blade was a growth approximately 15 centimeters in length. It possessed the density of bone but the flexibility of cartilage, covered in bark-like skin that wept a sweet-smelling amber fluid. The structure curved upward at a 45-degree angle, terminating in a cluster of smaller protrusions that resembled fingers, 7 of them, arranged like the petals of some obscene flower. I examined this growth with difficulty, requiring mirrors and my remaining augmetic visualization equipment to observe it properly. The structure was definitely connected to my skeletal system. I could feel the weight of it, the way it shifted my center of balance. But it was also innervated, possessing nerve connections that responded to my thoughts. When I focused mentally on the growth, it twitched, responding to my will just as my original limbs did, moving in response to intention. It was a new limb. My body had grown a third arm from my shoulder blade, and I could control it. I spent 6 hours that day learning to manipulate this appendage. The process was frustrating initially, like learning to use my birth limbs must have been in infancy, all random twitching and uncoordinated movement. But neuroplasticity is one of baseline humanity's most remarkable features, and my brain adapted with disturbing speed. By mid-afternoon, I could use the new limb to grasp objects. By evening, I could manipulate tools with reasonable precision. By the time I retired from my rest cycle, I could use it to write crude characters on my data slate while my original hands performed other tasks simultaneously. I had grown a functional third arm, and the ease with which I accepted this, with which my brain integrated this novel appendage into my body schema, terrified me more than the growth itself. I recorded my analysis with what I recognized as increasingly compromised objectivity. Novel appendage generation observed. Functionality exceeds expectations. Integration with existing motor control systems proceeding ahead of predicted timeline. Possible applications in multitasking scenarios. Applications. I was analyzing the tactical utility of demon-spawned growths. I was treating my transformation as upgrade rather than corruption. The psychological decay was accelerating faster than the physical changes. On day 10, I performed comprehensive internal scans using the medical augmetics integrated into my research station. What I discovered shattered any remaining illusion that my corruption was superficial, limited to external manifestations. My internal organs had undergone transformation so profound that calling it modification would be euphemism. My body's interior architecture had been completely restructured. My digestive system was the most obvious change. My stomach had developed 3 additional chambers beyond the baseline 2. Each possessed different acidic compositions optimized for different types of material breakdown. Chamber 1, original, pH 1.5, standard gastric acid, handled proteins and baseline organic matter. Chamber 2, new, pH 0.8, enhanced acidity, capable of processing materials that would resist normal digestion, cellulose, chitin, even light metals. Chamber 3, new, pH 11.2, alkaline rather than acidic, broke down mineral compounds through base catalysis. Chamber 4, new, pH 7, neutral, hosted colonies of engineered bacteria that performed biochemical synthesis of nutrients from materials neither acid nor base could process. Chamber 5, new, variable pH responding to content, adaptive chamber that modified its chemistry based on what it contained. My intestines had lengthened by approximately 40% and developed a secondary lining beneath the primary mucous membrane. This new layer hosted populations of symbiotic microorganisms that filtered nutrients with efficiency far exceeding baseline human capability. I tested this enhanced digestive capacity experimentally. I consumed materials that should have been indigestible or toxic. Raw tree bark, processed completely within 6 hours, nutrients extracted efficiently. Mineral compounds, small quantities of various metals, broken down and integrated. Some eliminated, some apparently incorporated into my transforming biology. A small piece of ceramite, approximately 1 gram, partially processed. The mineral components were extracted, the synthetic binders eliminated. My enhanced digestive system could process materials that would have poisoned, destroyed, or simply passed through a baseline human. I was becoming capable of sustaining myself on resources that normal humans could not utilize. But the circulatory system showed even more dramatic changes. My heart had grown a third chamber, increasing pumping efficiency by approximately 30%. More significantly, my vascular system had developed auxiliary pathways, redundant vessels that ensured blood flow even if primary arteries were severed. I tested this against all better judgment by making a small incision in my corrupted arm, cutting deep enough to sever what should have been a major artery. Blood flow from the wound was minimal. The auxiliary vessels immediately compensated, rerouting circulation around the damage. The wound closed within 17 minutes, not through normal clotting, but through accelerated regeneration. Tissue knitting itself together with speed that should have required days of healing compressed into minutes. My lungs had developed gas exchange membranes that operated with efficiency exceeding baseline human capacity by factors I could barely measure. I could extract oxygen from atmospheres with dangerously low O2 concentrations, could tolerate elevated CO2 levels that would incapacitate normal humans. I was becoming functionally superior to baseline humanity in every measurable parameter. Stronger, more durable, capable of surviving conditions that would kill unmodified humans. This should have been cause for horror. Instead, I found myself documenting these changes with what I can only describe as scientific pride. The corruption had progressed beyond my flesh. It was affecting my judgment, my values, my fundamental understanding of what constituted improvement versus degradation. Day 14. The ecosystem blooms. By day 14, I was no longer a single organism. I had become an ecosystem, a mobile environment hosting hundreds of distinct species in complex symbiotic relationships. The most obvious inhabitants were the Nurglings. I had first noticed these tiny demon creatures around day 8, when the boils and lesions on my corrupted flesh began producing something beyond mere fluid. The Nurglings did not emerge fully formed. I watched them develop from spores, growing in the protective environment of my body's lesions, feeding on the fluids and tissues my corruption produced. The first to achieve full consciousness manifested in a boil on my left bicep during the night of day 9. I felt it stirring, felt its awareness crystallizing into something that resembled sentience. When the boil burst in the early morning of day 10, out emerged a perfectly formed Nurgling. It was approximately the size of my thumb, bloated green body like an overfed infant, but clearly demonic in nature. Single roomy, eye that focused on me with disturbing intelligence, tiny arms ending in grasping fingers, a mouth full of needle teeth that it displayed in what might have been a smile. It looked up at me and giggled, that same high-pitched sound I had heard from the microscopic organisms in my first hours of corruption, but louder, more distinct. Then it climbed onto my shoulder with surprising dexterity and settled there, making happy gurgling sounds of contentment. I should have been horrified, should have destroyed it immediately, should have recognized it as demonic spawn requiring instant elimination. Instead, I found myself charmed. In a grotesque way, it was adorable. Its happiness was infectious. Its obvious affection for me, or perhaps for the corrupted environment my body provided, felt genuine in a way I struggled to reject. When it began grooming the corrupted portions of my skin, carefully cleaning the lesions and consuming the dead tissue, I recognized the behavior as symbiotic. It was helping me, performing maintenance functions on my transforming body, providing a service in exchange for the environment and nutrients I provided. Over the next 4 days, 7 more Nurglings emerged from various locations across my corrupted flesh. They varied slightly in appearance. Some had 2 eyes instead of 1. Others possessed additional limbs or unique markings, but all displayed the same playful, affectionate behavior. They established a social hierarchy among themselves, with the firstborn, I had named it Terminus, which should have been a warning sign about my deteriorating mental state, serving as their leader. They nested in the hollow that had formed in my left shoulder, where bone degradation and tissue reorganization had created a cavity approximately 15 centimeters in diameter, perfect for their small bodies. The Nurglings communicated with each other through a combination of gestures, giggles, and gurgling sounds that almost resembled language. They played games that looked like crude wrestling matches, but served some social bonding function I could not quite interpret. And they cared for my corrupted flesh with devoted attention, cleaning infections, removing dead tissue, even applying their own secretions to accelerate healing in damaged areas. But the Nurglings were merely the most visible and macroscopic inhabitants of my ecosystem. Microscopic analysis revealed my body hosted thousands of distinct species. Bacterial colonies formed intricate biofilms across my skin, creating protective barriers against hostile microorganisms while producing compounds that accelerated the corruption spread. Fungal networks had integrated with my cellular structure at the microscopic level, their hyphae interweaving with my tissues in ways that blurred the line between infection and symbiosis. Microorganisms existed in states between living and dead, metabolizing materials through processes that violated thermodynamic principles I had spent my life studying. And beneath all of this, in the deepest cellular structures, I could detect fragments of something else. Demon essence at the subcellular level. The raw stuff of the warp integrated into my biology in ways so fundamental that distinguishing me from corruption had become meaningless. I was not infected by an ecosystem. I had become an ecosystem, a walking garden of Nurgle's creation, hosting life forms that could not exist without my corrupted body to sustain them. And the most disturbing realization, this was efficient. These organisms processed waste products my normal biology could not handle. They produced compounds that enhanced my healing, my resilience, my ability to survive hostile environments. They constituted a secondary immune system that fought off infections my original immune system would have failed against. I was healthier than I had ever been. My body functioned better, tolerated more, recovered faster, all built on foundations of absolute biological corruption that would have me executed as abomination if any imperial authority discovered my state. Day 18. The senses transform. On day 18, my sensory perception underwent transformation so profound it altered my experience of reality itself. This development was perhaps the most psychologically disturbing aspect of my entire corruption, because it changed not what I was, but how I perceived and interpreted the universe around me. Vision transformed first. My eyes, still two at this point, though that would change, began seeing in expanded electromagnetic spectrums. The visible light range humans naturally perceive is a narrow slice of total electromagnetic radiation. Now I could see deep into infrared and ultraviolet bands simultaneously. The world revealed itself in colors that had no names because baseline human language had never required words for them. Hues impossible to describe to someone who has never perceived them. I could see heat signatures through solid walls,